Chapter 159 Xenophobia, Bullying, and the Sovereign Descends. Huro Yuao's expression grew solemn and gloomy. His eyes narrowed into slits, and a cold light flickered through them. I just want to learn here, yet you guys just had to force my hand. Huro Yuao knew that the best thing for him to do would be to find Sun Wen and let his teacher resolve his predicament. However, he knew that doing so would mean lowering his head to the four of them. A moment of timidity and cowardice like that would probably lead to even more bullying in the future. How could he focus on studying if that happened? He heaved a sigh and mumbled exasperatedly under his breath. You guys forced me. He raised his right hand once he'd finished speaking and pressed it to the lab door. A pale golden radiance flickered in his eyes, and one white, one purple, and one black soul ring, quite a peculiar combination, gradually rose from his body. This was the true color of his spirit eye soul rings, but whether or not others would believe what this was a different story. After all, not many people believed that the colors of one's soul rings could be changed at will. Sun Wen had asked Huro Yuao if he could use his spiritual detection to probe into metallic objects, to which Huro Yuao had answered that he could, but only to a certain extent. This was a huge breakthrough he'd achieved in his 2 years of cultivating spiritual detection, and he'd come up with a name for it: focus. He could focus his energy on a single point to increase its penetrative power and analytical abilities to a truly formidable level. Huro Yuao's target of choice was naturally the lab's access control soul tool. His gaze quickly concentrated on a single point. He raised his right hand that he'd just pressed against the door and pointed his index finger at a certain spot. Dark golden light sparkled the next moment, and a sharp blade extended from his fingertip and pierced into the alloy door. One had to admit that the Sun Moon Imperial Soul Engineering Academy didn't skimp with the mechanisms they used to protect their laboratories. The door was at least half a foot thick and was incredibly tough. Huro Yuao had the ability to break it down, but it would consume too much of his soul power to do so. He had several things he needed to do after this, thus he didn't want to expend too much energy. It wasn't easy for his dark golden terraclaw to drill through such a tough alloy. His dark golden terraclaw released an piercing sound as it ground through it, and was accompanied by intermittent sparks. However, he was gradually making progress thanks to the terraclaw's extraordinary sharpness. He drilled about 2 inches in before violently jabbing his finger inwards, causing the access control soul tool to instantly explode in a shower of sparks. Huro Yuao immediately withdrew his dark golden terraclaw when this happened, and the door opened before him. The best method to open a door guarded with the soul tool was to destroy the soul tool guarding it. It hadn't been too difficult for him to find the crucial formation arrays. Beep, 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 beep. The sound of an alarm rang out. The four inside of the lab all turned to stare at him with dumbfounded expressions on their faces. Not even in their wildest dreams had they expected Huro Yuao to break down the door. They'd never even suspected that he had the ability to do so. The shrill alarm continued to ring, but Huro Yuao pretended to not hear anything and stepped into the laboratory. He didn't even look at the four of them as he sauntered towards the place that he'd just been cleaning previously. Stop right there. The young girl exclaimed in both fury and shock. You dare to damage our lab? Have you already forgotten what we just told you? If we see you inside one more time, we'll beat you up again. Huro Yuao stopped in his tracks and gradually turned around. His expression was full of regret and pity as he said, I gave you guys one last chance after opening the door. Since you have refused to take it, then I'm sorry. I suspect you guys are intruders, and Juzi is your accomplice on the inside. I will take all of you down and hand you guys over to Teacher Sun. Where did this little bastard come from? Who do you think you are? Don't you think you're punching above your weight? Take us down. You. The tall youth that stood in front of everyone exclaimed indifferently. Juzi was also indignant, and only the relatively good-looking youth revealed an expression of astonishment, but didn't react much. He had already decided what he was going to do once he broke down the lab door. He wanted to give these fellows a show of strength. Did they really think he was that easily bullied? Golden light flashed from his eyes, and one white, one purple, and one black soul ring appeared on his body. The four of them were slightly taken aback when they saw his soul rings. 3 rings wasn't much in their eyes, but the colors of Huro Yuao's 3 soul rings were simply too peculiar. Just as they were momentarily off-put, Huro Yuao's first and third soul rings lit up at the same time. Huro Yuao's pupils immediately turned white, and a circle of white light subsequently expanded from his body. The lab's entire atmosphere twisted and contorted. When Juzi and the others looked at him again, they felt as if everything around them had turned blurry and obscure. Even though Juzi and the others weren't inside the illustrious Virtue Hall, they were the Sun Moon Imperial Soul Engineering Academy's 6th-year students, and they could be considered the elites of their batch. How could they just sit back and let Huro Yuao attack them? Juzi's reaction was the fastest. Uncountable oranges lunged towards Huro Yuao's slightly contorting figure, while the handsome youth beside her raised both hands and held out 6 hexagon-shaped golden boxes. A golden light screen wrapped around them and protected them inside itself. Right before Huro Yuao's circle of white radiance hit them, the four of them unleashed their martial souls at the same time. As powerful soul tools required sufficient soul power to maximize their effects, a giant cannon that was disproportionate to her body size suddenly appeared on the tiny young girl's shoulder. This cannon barrel was even larger than Hikadu's giant lightning cannon, and it looked quite heavy. The tall youth flipped out more than 50 strange soul cannons of all kinds. Even though it wasn't a soul tool fortress, he moved incredibly fast, and the number of soul cannons he was already displaying outmatched most soul tool fortresses. It was a pity that they still underestimated Huro Yuao's abilities. The white circle of light effortlessly passed right through the layer of golden light, not impeded at all, and struck the four of them, just like that. Their eyes immediately turned white, and an intense weakness coursed over their bodies. Their subsequent movements seemed to be slower than usual as dizziness, weakness in their legs, and fatigue caused them to stumble around. This was especially so for the young girl with the enormous cannon, who almost lost her balance. It was right at this moment that Huro Yuao suddenly vanished right in front of them, disappearing into the flurry of oranges that was still in midair. Huro Yuao had been tricked before, so he wouldn't fall into the same trap again in the face of a similar attack. He was almost sliding across the ground when he slipped out, and he grabbed at the air above him again and again while he was sliding. He seized 6 actual oranges in the blink of an eye, and held them towards the golden layer of light. Food-type soul masters were the most adept at materializing soul power. The food items that they produced were real, and actually had special effects. Oranges contained moisture inside them, and he had now transformed them into solid ice. What could 6 oranges do against a class 5 soul barrier? Huro Yuao gave them the answer. These 4 students from the Sun Moon Imperial Soul Engineering Academy were outstanding enough. Even though they were struck by Huro Yuao's mass enfeeblement and their minds were under the influence of spiritual interference, they still managed to unleash their respective attacks. The handsome youth stepped forward and stood in front of Juzi as a pristine white light barrier rose from his body. He raised his right arm at the same time, and a fiery red longsword instantly appeared in his hands. Strength and burliness was not a characteristic of long-range soul masters. He was tall and lanky, yet he was a close combat soul master. The close combat soul tool in his hands was also clearly a special item. The tall youth's body erupted with soul rays and soul cannon shells, his judgment extremely accurate for his currently weakened state. He blanked the area Huro Yuao was moving into and through with ranged fire. It was unfortunate for him that his mind was far too hampered by spiritual interference, and adding in Huro Yuao's accurate judgments by spiritual detection. Huro Yuao simply shifted his position subtly as he surged past this shower of attacks. The tiny young girl only stabilized herself at this moment, but she hesitated in firing her giant cannon. If she fired this giant cannon inside the laboratory, the cost would be. Just as she hesitated, Huro Yuao arrived before the light barrier. This was a lab after all, and not some competition arena. The distance between both parties was not even 10 meters before this. Boom, 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 boom. 6 vigorous explosions could be heard on the golden light barrier. The things that detonated were the 6 oranges that Huro Yuao had tossed out before this ice explosion. However, it didn't look like that from their perspective. The tiny young girl reacted in shock and fury as she shouted, "What are you doing, Juzi?" An enormous crack appeared on the golden light barrier after this series of explosions, and Huro Yuao's hands slammed ferociously against the light barrier in the next moment. Fearsome energy spewed from his body like crashing mountains and tidal waves. Diamond ice crystals covered his large palms, and a faint green luster was shining from them. The golden light barrier wasn't able to resist for even a single second. It was blown to smithereens under his hands with a string of shrill breaking sounds. He used the ghost shadow perplexing track, and his figure appeared even more surreal and virtual under the incredible masking effects of his spiritual interference. He was beside the tiny young girl in a flash, and used the controlling crane capturing dragon technique to pull her in front of him. and directly into the path of the Tall Youth's Soul Tool onslaught. There were two main types of soul barriers in a soul engineer's defensive arsenal. One was soul rays and shells that were similar to soul power attacks, and the other was soul barriers that could defend against physical attacks. Both could be used at the same time, but soul engineers would typically only choose one when they were engaged in battle. In the end, it was rare for soul engineers to use physical attacks. This was the case even for close combat soul engineers. The golden light barrier released by the handsome youth was meant to defend against physical attacks. This tiny young girl didn't have the same accurate judgment, and this took Hua Yuao by surprise, so his large hands immediately clamped onto her neck. Everything happened far too quickly. The time needed for 2 breaths was all it took for Hua Yuao to make a move to the point when he closed his fingers around the girl's neck. Both parties had tremendously quick reactions, but it was undoubtedly Hua Yuao who came out on top. The tiny young girl was unexpectedly strong. She was still struggling and twisting her neck in resistance to Hua Yuao's ice empress pincer while she pushed backwards with her hands, and her right leg sprung out at the same time to kick Hua Yuao's vital points. Unfortunately, it was to no avail. The soul barrier on her body blocked off the Tall Youth's soul tool barrage, but that was it. She felt an intense chill on her neck before a wave of numbness came over her body, and she collapsed onto the ground like a ragdoll. Purplish golden light immediately erupted from Hua Yuao's eyes. He hated it when people dragged in his mother when they were insulting him, and the little bastard that the Tall Youth had just called him was one of the main reasons why he was infuriated and immediately launched an assault. Therefore, this formidable purple demon-eyed spiritual shock was naturally intended for that tall and lanky youth. The most frightening feature of spirit-type attacks was that the defensive barriers previously mentioned were entirely useless against them, and those struck by such an attack could only use their own spiritual power to protect themselves. These 4 students from the Sun Moon Imperial Soul Engineering Academy were 5-ring Soul Kings, but their spiritual power absolutely paled in comparison to Hua Yuao's. Blood gushed from the Tall Youth's mouth, nose, eyes and ears as he grunted and crashed onto the ground. His eyes rolled back into his head, and he fainted straight away. Hua Yuao's movements didn't stop because of this. His right hand flickered with dark golden light and he sliced directly towards the handsome youth. This was because the handsome youth's sharp sword stabbed at him just as he unleashed his spiritual shock. The handsome youth's hands were as stable as ever even under the effects of Hua Yuao's mass enfeeblement. He stabbed out with his sword and projected 3 sword shadows into the air. They were like 3 blooming roses as they covered all of Hua Yuao's vital points. Hua Yuao made the right judgment in this split second that he was inferior to his opponent in terms of close combat techniques. However, this didn't mean that his opponent's close combat strength was more powerful than his. Therefore, he gave the handsome youth a complete dark golden terror claw. An enormous dark golden blade slashed down from the sky and crashed against the soul barrier that the handsome youth quickly released. The class 5 soul barrier instantly crumbled, and the roses he had formed were the next to break apart. Hua Yuao punched out with his left fist after he slashed out with his right hand. His right foot took a step forward, and Hua Yuao punched forward simply without any special effects. However, this punch wasn't simple at all in this handsome youth's eyes. It felt as if all of Hua Yuao's spiritual power was concentrated onto this fist. In the handsome youth's eyes, this fist was all that was left of Hua Yuao, a fist that sparkled with diamond brilliance. A golden shield appeared in the handsome youth's hands. He held the shield up with both hands and infused his Soul King level soul power inside. Dense soul power rippled, and the shield erupted with golden luster. I cannot possibly lose this. The handsome youth could not longer maintain his composure. 2 yellow and 3 purple soul rings sparkled on his body. However, the peculiar 3-ring combination had already disappeared from Hua Yuao's body. Boom. Hua Yuao's fist connected with the shield, and what the handsome youth felt in that moment could only be described as wretched and shattering. He felt as if his shield wasn't the only thing that was being destroyed. His mind was breaking apart at the same time as a defenseless sensation burst from the bottom of his heart, and he felt as if his entire world was being torn apart. He puked out a stream of blood. The handsome youth followed in the tall youth's footsteps and collapsed onto the ground. Blood trickled from his nostrils like miniature snakes, but the shield in his hands didn't actually break apart. Hua Yuao's eyes erupted with golden radiance, and he turned towards his last remaining adversary, Juzi. At this point, her eyes were a little lackadaisical, and her face was completely pale. What are you doing? An astonished voice could be heard right at this moment, and a figure appeared in the lab with a flash and stood in front of Juzi. The golden radiance in Hua Yuao's eyes vanished at almost the same time, and his previous frightening aura, as if he reigned supreme over the entire world, also receded. Supreme Reign. Yes, this was Supreme Reign. This was the name of his ability, and it was invented by the ultimate duo, Elder Mu. It was a terrifying ability that combined both physical and spiritual attacks, and Hua Yuao was the only person in the entire world who had inherited this ability. Supreme Reign wasn't a soul skill, it was more, and it could be used with any soul skill. However, it could only be used to infuse spiritual power into physical attacks. In other words, this ability's foundations were still in physical attacks. Hua Yuao could inject his formidable spiritual power into his physical attacks, but he couldn't flip the process around. In the end, the creator of Supreme Reign wasn't a spirit-type soul master. Elder Mu had commented to Hua Yuao before that if he could find out how to reverse the process, then he would have succeeded in life. Of course, this was still quite a distance away from Hua Yuao's current standard. There were just too many things that he had to learn, and even though the ultimate soldier plan was starting to bear fruit, the path ahead of him was still extremely long. Sun Quan was overcome with a haze of terror as he stood before Juzi, who was ghastly pale at this point. He would have taken another 15 minutes to reach the lab, but he was alarmed by the security sirens. He had remote control over his door's access control soul tool, so he was as bewildered as could be when he realized that the incident was coming from his own lab, and he came as fast as he could. Sun Quan was flabbergasted as he watched his 3 students unconscious on the ground. Hua Yuao had mentioned to him before on the first day that they met each other that he was confident of perishing together with him within a fixed distance. He didn't pay much attention to that then, but how could he not be shaken to his very roots by the scene before him now? These 4 students had been his personal students ever since they had entered year 6, including Juzi. He was naturally acutely aware of his students' abilities. They were all soul kings and class 5 soul engineers, and were considered the best of the best amongst their batch. Yet, Hua Yuao didn't even have his 4th soul ring, and 3 of them were actually defeated. He had no doubt that Juzi would also hit the deck if he had arrived just a second later. This child is so fearsome and outrageously powerful at such a young age. No wonder. Sun Quan had perused his files and records since the first day he met Hua Yuao, especially his experience during the Continental Advanced Academy Soul Dueling Tournament. His files detailed Hua Yuao's performance during several key battles, and it was remarked that he had been mentored by the dragon god Duoluo, Mu En, before his passing. He was one of the absolute elites amongst the younger batch of students from Shrek, and he was definitely in line to participate in the next season's Continental Advanced Academy Soul Dueling Tournament. Sun Quan didn't have much of an impression after browsing through his records. He could see that Hua Yuao's records mentioned that he had twin martial souls, but the records mentioned that Yuao's soul power rank was only a little more than 20 during the competition, and he only had 2 soul rings. Even though nobody knew his soul ring's exact level, his files had clear records of his abilities. One of the more salient ones featured his martial soul fusion skill with Wang Dong, and Sun Quan was more interested in the fact that the 2 of them could use martial soul fusion skills rather than in Hua Yuao's personal battle prowess, and so he paid less attention to the latter. Sun Quan suddenly realized that he was wrong. Hua Yuao's personal battle prowess was weak. Then, what's the deal with these 3 guys lying on the ground? Hua Yuao crushed 3 class 5 soul engineers even without his 4th soul ring, and the last one wasn't even fit to continue the battle. This caused Sun Quan to lose all his faith and confidence in his previous experiences. Teacher Sun, these guys hacked the access control and barged into the lab. I was afraid they were intruders, so I made the first move, and I was going to take them down and hand them over to you. Juzi brought them here, and I suspect they are accomplices in this act. Please take care of this. Hua Yuao spoke as if he were recounting the truth. His face of sincerity was totally disproportionate to the ferocious aura that he had emanated during the battle before this. Juzi had recovered by now. Her face was still as pale as ever, and she exclaimed, "Nonsense. You intentionally attacked us." Hua Yuao shrugged and replied, "If you guys hadn't hacked the access control, and if you guys hadn't insulted me, why would I treat you like intruders? Did I say something wrong? Teacher Sun, you can inspect the access control soul tool. They deceived me after barging into the lab to step out, and they hacked it afterwards. I had to force my way in to ensure the lab safety, so that I could take them down. They They have only lost their autonomy and ability to move, and some are slightly injured. It's not a big deal. Sun Zwen was immersed in Soul Tool research, but he wasn't a fool. He could tell from Huo Yuao's description that Juzi and the others had bullied Huo Yuao, who was new to this place. Huo Yuao was infuriated, and found an excuse to retaliate. The process wasn't that important. What was more substantial was that the four of them fell before Huo Yuao one after another, and Huo Yuao was just standing there without even a speck of dirt on his body. Could he have some special Soul Tool on him? Sun Zwen was a little suspicious. Many academy guards had arrived by this time. Sun Zwen shot a glare at Huo Yuao and walked out of the laboratory. He explained what had happened to the guards, telling them that something went wrong with his students' experiments in the lab, and it had already been resolved. Experimenting with Soul Tools was bound to give rise to all sorts of problems. The guards naturally knew that Sun Zwen was a reputable researcher from the illustrious Virtue Hall, so they didn't suspect the truth of his words and departed immediately afterward. Sun Zwen tinkered with the access control Soul Tool and returned it to normal. Juzi stared at Huo Yuao and wanted to say something threatening, but nothing came out of her mouth. It was clear that this kid, who was actually younger than she was, had instilled a deep sense of fear in her. She had brought 3 classmates back with her today to seek vengeance for what had happened the day before, when she was frozen by the domain of perpetual ice. Even though she had recovered, she was shivering for pretty much the entire day afterwards, and it wasn't that easy to recuperate. She was instantly infuriated when she thought about Huo Yuao watching her secretly and even attacking her. She waited for her classmates to return before she recounted the episode, and everyone came to an easy consensus. They all agreed to show Huo Yuao, this new student who had just arrived, who was boss around here. However, never in Juzi's dreams had she expected Huo Yuao to overwhelm their combined strength. Even though the laboratory wasn't big, and no one went all out, Huo Yuao's movements were just too quick. He never gave them a chance to show their best, and then the battle was over. If Teacher Sun hadn't arrived in the nick of time, she would probably have been struck down as well. How did he do that? He didn't use any soul tools. He was just relying on his power as a soul master. Juzi had always been one of the Sun Moon Imperial Soul Engineering Academy's elites, and she was confident of passing the illustrious Virtue Hall's entry examination. Her research with soul tools had gone so deep that she was beginning to doubt the abilities of a soul master. From her perspective, a soul master of the same class would never be able to outmatch a soul engineer from the Sun Moon Imperial Soul Engineering Academy like her. But today, Huo Yuao had completely turned her opinions around. Even though she wasn't convinced, she couldn't help but feel a sense of defeat and self-deprecation whenever she thought about Huo Yuao's 3 soul rings lighting up at the same time. Huo Yuao continued to act as if nothing had happened, and went back to cleaning the place up, especially the oranges that littered the ground. Sun Zwen closed the lab door with a strange expression on his face and walked back to everyone. He checked the 3 collapsed students on the ground to make sure they were okay, but suddenly realized that he had a problem on his hands. Huo Yuao made it seem like it wasn't a big deal, and that their lives weren't in danger, but it wasn't as simple as losing their fighting strength. The only person that was in relatively good shape was the tiny young girl. Only her central nervous system had been frozen by Huo Yuao's ultimate ice, and she ended up like Juzi on the first day, who had recovered after shivering for an entire day. The other 2 circumstances were a lot less optimistic. The tall youth took a hit from Huo Yuao's spiritual shock. Even though Huo Yuao had limited his spiritual power, he gave his opponent a solid and ferocious hit in return for the humiliation. The powerful spiritual shock had caused the tall youth's spiritual seed to disassemble and come apart. He was now in a coma, and he definitely wouldn't wake up for a while. It was hard to say whether he would experience any sequelae when he woke up. The handsome youth was in a slightly better situation. He had suffered a traumatic injury that Sun Zwen couldn't identify, and there seemed to be some remnants of power left inside his body that was still wreaking havoc. It wasn't that fierce, but Sun Zwen was an 8-ring soul duo, and even he couldn't resolve it with all his power. Come here, Yuao. Sun Zwen waved towards Huo Yuao. Yes? Huo Yuao walked over immediately. Sun Zwen glanced at him with an inscrutable expression. He lowered his voice and said, "The 3 of them are my students. I know that you must have received some injustice, but you have wounded them in return, so let's call it even. What do you think?" It was Huo Yuao's turn to be shocked. He had originally expected Sun Zwen to chide or punish him, and he was mentally prepared for that eventuality. However, he didn't expect Teacher Sun to resolve the issue so casually. "I will listen to you." Huo Yuao answered like an obedient child. Juzi watched from the side with a look of annoyance. She thought to herself, "You little bastard, acting like an obedient and gentle little child in front of Teacher Sun. You were so fierce just a moment ago." Sun Zwen continued, "You're an exchange student, and you will be studying with us for 2 years. No matter what, they are still your seniors, and the academy prohibits fighting inside the laboratories. We'll let this go, and I hope there won't be a next time. Of course, I will control and restrict them. If they trouble you again, I will punish them according to the academy's rules. However, you have to help me heal them, as I don't wish for anything bad to happen to my students. Do you understand what I'm trying to say?" "I understand." Huo Yuao didn't mince his words, and pointed a finger at the tall youth. "I can't help him, Teacher Sun. I have only had my mother since I was young, but my mother is no longer around, and he called me a little bastard. There is nothing I can do to help him. Find a place to let him rest, and he will recover on his own after about half a month. However, he might experience some spiritual disorientation for a period of time." He immediately knelt down on the floor afterwards. He pressed down on the back of the tiny girl's neck and withdrew his ultimate ice energy, before he walked beside the handsome youth and patted him on the body several times to neutralize the Supreme Rain's mystical effects. The 2 of them woke up one after the other. The tiny girl shivered violently, before she suddenly saw Huo Yuao right next to her. She leapt to her feet and was about to erupt once again until Sun Zwen stopped her with a furious exclamation. "Enough, KK. If you still want to cause trouble, get out of my sight." It was only then that the tiny girl, KK, realized Sun Zwen was present. She said with an aggrieved expression, "He's a bully, Teacher Sun. He hit me. You have to get justice for me." It was obvious that she was better than Juzi was at throwing tantrums. Sun Zwen grunted coldly and muttered, "Do you think I don't know who's bullying who? How can you mess around with them?" Xinyu, the handsome youth, Xinyu, had a look of exasperation as he replied, "Don't be angry, Teacher Sun. We were wrong." He didn't push the issue, and Huo Yuao couldn't help but glance a few more times in his direction. Sun Zwen said, "Wang Xiaojie needs more time to rest. Send him back to the dormitory, and I will send a teacher responsible for healing students to see to him soon." "Yes," Xinyu acknowledged. He turned towards Huo Yuao momentarily, and he couldn't help but quiver when his eyes came across this youth for reasons he couldn't explain, as if something in his spirit had been shattered. Huo Yuao met Xinyu's gaze calmly. He was much more familiar with Supreme Rain's effects. Supreme Rain was a mighty ability that combined physical and spiritual attacks. Once his opponent took a hit from Supreme Rain, their confidence would be crushed as well. His opponent would develop a fear of him, as if there were no way they could resist him the next time they encountered each other. Xinyu carried Wang Xiaojie away, and Sun Zwen turned towards Yuao with an exasperated look. "Oh, Yuao. This is a little problematic. Wang Xiaojie belongs to the royal family. Even though he's not a direct member, he belongs to an aristocratic family that has been added to the royal family's register. The academy needs to answer to them now that you have wounded him." Huo Yuao lowered his head and said, "Everything is up to you, Teacher Sun." He was ready to give and ready to take, and he knew he couldn't be overly tough and stubborn if he wanted to continue studying at the Sun Moon Imperial Soul Engineering Academy. He was positive that Teacher Sun could do something about this with his status within the academy. Indeed, Sun Zwen frowned and said, "All right, that's enough. Let me handle this. You can stay in the lab and clean everything up. Nobody will cause trouble for you again. If not, don't blame me for not giving you another chance." With that, he hurried away. Even though Huo Yuao refused to help Wang Xiaojie, the Sun Moon Imperial Soul Engineering Academy's medicinal prowess was relatively formidable, and it wouldn't be hard for him to find someone to heal Wang Xiaojie. This infighting would quickly be resolved as long as he was okay. The laboratory door closed once again, and only Huo Yuao, Juzi, and KK were left inside. Huo Yuao didn't say anything else, and continued cleaning up the lab. KK and Juzi were extremely close and intimate, and they knew what the other was thinking the moment their gazes met. KK's red lips shifted up and down, and she mouthed to Juzi, "This fellow is so powerful. Even 4 of us can't take him down." Juzi was a little unconvinced. "That's because we're inside the lab. If we were outside, and if we were given enough space, he would have no chance at all." She didn't suppress her voice, and intentionally said everything out loud. Huo Yuao pretended as if he hadn't heard anything, and kept at what he was doing. KK chimed in and harmonized with Juzi. "He's a soul master. He has an advantage at close range, but he doesn't have a chance at a distance. We shall see when we're on our expeditions." Huo Yuao suddenly straightened his back and stared at KK. KK was taken by surprise and raised her hands to protect herself. She stammered nervously, "What are you doing?" A mocking smile appeared on Huo Yuao's face. Strength and ability doesn't come from speech or from the mouth. You might as well spend the time researching or studying soul tools. I can help you if you need guidance or whatnot. The oranges on the floor had been swept into his storage-type soul tool at this point. He cleaned up the lab every single day, and it was spick and span in the blink of an eye. He found a spot to sit down after completing his task, and quietly contemplated some questions for his teacher he had regarding soul tools while he waited for Sun Zwen to come back. Thanks so much for watching this video. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Also leave a comment down below with suggestions on what novels to read.